Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Chasing Shadows, a supplemental podcast supporting our Ecclesiastes sermon series here at the Austin Stone. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Ross Lester, joined always by my co-host and good friend, Val Hamilton, and joined today by the ever-elusive Yoda of the Austin Stone Community Church in a very rare online appearance, our pastor of teaching and theology, the one and only Halem Sah.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for joining us, brother.
Yeah, thanks for dragging me in.
Well, thank you for stepping out of your study momentarily. While I know that you love our people very much, I do know that being on a podcast is about your least favorite activity that you could take part in. And so we do appreciate you doing that as an act of love for our people, not just bringing the word so faithfully on a Sunday, but serving us here as well. For folks who don't know you, why don't you tell us just a little bit more about you? Maybe start with your family and then tell us your history briefly here at the Stone and what you currently do here at the church.
Many years ago, met a girl named Angela who was nice enough to marry me. Actually, she was not nice. She was really mean. It took me a long time to get her to trick her into marrying me.
But you wore her down.
Yeah.
That was good.
But now
she's very nice now. I've met her.
She's real nice to me now, but I think it's mostly because she feels bad for me. We have 4 kids, Malachi, Evie, Moses, and Ben, 16, 15, 13, and 10. So we got one driving. That's the season we're in. One learning to drive. So it's a crazy season. And we've been at the Stone for 19 years and found a church that was nice enough, again, to have a 26-year-old pastor come. And nice enough to let me stay these many years. So, it's just the story of God putting nice people in my life that lets me hang around.
Just his kindness and favor to you.
Yeah.
So you're our pastor of teaching and theology. What does that entail largely in terms of your week in, week out responsibilities? You're also an elder in our North congregation and so serve pastorally there. But in terms of shaping our pulpit, what does your job look like there?
It is a title I do not like because it sounds very fancy and job title that nobody could really live up to. Pastor of theology. What does that mean?
Theology wizard, Gandalf.
But I guess if you break it down, it's studying who God is and knowing who he is and helping our church know who he is. Through study, through teaching, and helping our other teachers and pastors do that as well. I guess then it's fitting. That's what I like to do, love to do. So,
Is this your dream job?
Dream job.
Yeah. Is this it? Have we hit it?
I don't know. I don't know. But
it's pretty good.
It's pretty good. Yeah. Love our people here.
Well, you serve our church so faithfully and so well, brother. As part of our preaching team, I know that you make me sound a lot smarter than I really am. And it gives me great comfort on a Wednesday usually to be able to send my notes to you and know that I'll get commentary and input back that is biblical and thoughtful and Godward in its orientation. You've continued to teach me to have a big God, small us kind of view of the world. And so your fingerprints are all over the kind of public manifestation of our theology here at the church. And so I'm very thankful for you, brother, and enjoy serving alongside you.
Well, thankful for you. Thankful for you, Val. Thankful for just, I can't imagine trying to lead a church, serve a church by yourself. And so, God's given us a good community.
Amen. Well, the sermon we're talking about today is one that was preached on September 8th. It unpacked Ecclesiastes 3, which is probably the most famous section of Ecclesiastes in terms of it being publicly and broadly known. Anyone who's watched Forrest Gump knows the bird song, for every season.
It's the only reason I knew it.
And it's an interesting text because it's actually regularly cited at both weddings and funerals because it kind of speaks of both of those realities. And so, Halem, in the sermon you preached, you pointed out how the 28 contrasting things in terms of time all seem random in our life under the sun. But then the preacher, he introduces this other famous concept, maybe the next best known concept from Ecclesiastes, which is that God makes everything beautiful in its time, and that he's placed eternity in the hearts of men. So I love how this poem deals with kind of life under the sun, all these things that happen to us. And then he lifts our eyes to this notion of eternity and a God who exists outside of time and space and makes everything beautiful. How do these two concepts of God making things beautiful, but then God also putting eternity in our hearts, how do you see those changing the way that we view time and the seasons of our lives and the things that we have to enjoy or endure in this life?
I think, first of all, I love the fact that it says he makes everything beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, that it's one thing to make something work. It's another thing to make something beautiful.
Yeah.
And that we have a God who is at work to make things beautiful. And so I think that's incredible. The idea of putting eternity in our hearts, it makes me think about the song "O Holy Night," where, you know, long lay the world in sin and error pining till he appeared and the soul felt its worth, you know? And just this idea of the eternal entering, the infinite entering into the finite, and somehow the finite feeling its worth because of that, you know? And but we see, like, that's the God that we have from the very beginning when he breathed his breath into us, into a shaped dirt. And then that's how we came to be. And we see it in his sending his son, Jesus, this idea of a stable containing the infinite, you know? And I think over and over again, you see this pattern of Christ in us, the hope of glory, the Holy Spirit in us, you know, and God essentially saying, I'm going to bind myself up with you, you know, and the touching of the infinite with the finite over and over again, so that we who are just trying to live and wondering what life is about, there's all these marks of God saying, don't you see and don't you feel your worth, you know? And we live blind to it most of the time. But I think through times and through seasons that enter in and out, they're supposed to kind of shake us and awaken us out of the mundane, whether it's just the joy of a meal, you know, or whether it's the tear, the tragedy of some diagnosis. These things enter in to make us question, make us wonder once again, and hopefully to realize, oh, I'm created for something more. There's a different purpose and different plan, and there's something beautiful that God is doing. And so, yeah, that's what that makes me think of. Yeah.
Well, and even what you're saying, just God is so personal to us that he would come into our experience and put eternity like that into our into our hearts. And, you know, Ross, you mentioned how quoted this is, but it's often not quoted, the second half of that verse, which says he does this so that we cannot find out what he's done from the beginning and to the end. And so he's doing this thing where he's creating meaning. We know that it's there, but he doesn't always reveal that meaning to us, which you said so beautifully in the sermon. And I just wonder, why do you think that is? Like, God has this meaning, and he could, I mean, he's sovereign. He could reveal the meaning to us for us to see what it's all for now. Why do you think he kind of delays on that?
It makes me think about, apart from faith, we can't please him. You know, there's this thing called faith, trusting, believing without knowing. And what makes faith is the not seeing and not knowing. And I think human beings are unique in all of creation, in that we are created to be like God, but at the same time, we are not God. And so because of the eternity in our hearts, there's this constant longing and a desire to want to know more and want to understand. From the garden, tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we wanted to take from it. And from the very beginning, there was a prohibition. There's so many approved blessings by God. Yet at the same time, the prohibition shows us what we are not to be, which is God himself. And so I think the eternity in our hearts and the fact that we do have a God in heaven helps us know that there is a purpose, there is a meaning for it all, but him not revealing it, not all of it anyways, from the beginning so that we cannot know from the beginning to the end what he has done, allows us to embrace our creatureliness and places us, like almost forces us into a situation where we have to trust and believe that there is a purpose and a meaning, and that purpose and meaning is good and it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's like that gap is an opportunity, right? An opportunity to reach to something bigger than yourself. Like the message of Ecclesiastes is, if you fill that gap just with your own pursuits, it folds back in on itself and never gets to where it should be. But if we fill that with faith and reach beyond the sun, there's opportunity to know God and the meaning of the universe, which is just a stunning way that God would actually reveal, conceal some of himself so that we would reach to him. It's actually beautiful.
It makes this life that we have such an amazing, life is but a breath, but can it be a beautiful breath? Can it be such a meaningful breath in the sense that we now see dimly, but then we will see face to face. And so here's this life that we get to live in a sense where it's just a brief window in which we only get a sense. It's only a brief window where we see dimly, because then we will see clearly. And so what an opportunity to trust him and believe in him and have faith in him in a way that's going to be different than the rest of eternity.
Well, and even what you're saying in those moments where it's really easy to see the beautiful life God has given us, right? Like sometimes that's just so easy to see how God has made things beautiful. But even what you're describing in the waiting, when things are hard, when you're wondering, why doesn't God show me the meaning of this thing so that I can see the beauty now? There's something really helpful and comforting when hard things happen. Maybe even in your mind, the worst things have happened. Your kind of worst fears come true sometimes in life. And you think this is going to be the most defining thing about me, about my existence. And there is something comforting to say, like, they're deep down nestled, when that faith is necessary, God can reveal that kind of faith, that the very things you thought would make life unbearable or not be able to move forward, there's actually something bigger and beyond that. That God can fulfill and God can promise that you can hold on to, even when you don't see the meaning in the moment. I think something else you mentioned, Halim, during the sermon that really stood out to me was the idea of nostalgia. Just as a mom with young kids, I mean, they're young, but they're actually getting older. They're going to be 4 and 5 next month. And I felt that tension of the bittersweetness of nostalgia, where I'm so thankful that I have these videos that I can look back if my kid's just covered in spaghetti and like wearing shirts as pants. And I'm like, this is amazing. I love them. But it also pangs my heart a little bit to be like, oh gosh, he's going to kindergarten. And I know that you probably feel that with having, your kids are driving now and they're going to go to college. And it just kind of made me think about the importance of being present for the times that we're in. Because you kept saying in the sermon that, you look back and the moments later, the moment you're right now looking back is going to be a moment you would look back to later. And so how would you encourage people to be present for the present moments where the gifts, because I think what you mentioned that was so helpful is those gifts are there to help us see God and to just fully breathe in those gifts and see the Creator. What encouragement would you have for our people to really be present for the moments happening now?
I think there's a way to kind of overreact in the sense that we try to make that moment our everything, like just kind of the fearful way of holding on to those moments, especially when it comes to like our kids, and it's like the scene where you grab a hold of their face and you're like, stay here as long as you can, and like stay this little, never leave, and so I think you could react in that way, and I think that would be the way of trying to make more out of the gift than what it really is, and trying to make it your gain. But I have a tendency the other way of just like, okay, can we get out of the diaper stage? Okay, can we get to the next thing, and okay, finally, if they start driving, it'll be okay. There's all these like progressing to the next thing and the next thing, and looking to the next thing as the answer for your current problems and struggles and stress. But then you get to the next thing and that's not it. So then you look forward to the next thing, like until what? Yeah. Until you're dead, you know? And then what was the point? And so you got these two extremes that you could kind of deal with life. But just being in the moment and present and enjoying it for what it is. But like C.S. Lewis talks about, it's not in the gift, so it's through the gift. Right. And so this time, this place, this season, these gifts, how can what's God's purpose in giving me these gifts right now? What does he want me to see through them? Yeah.
Which makes those hard moments, like when you do have the young kids, or the thing doesn't go the way through. There's meaning and purpose still in that. Like, what is God trying to show me about himself through this that I couldn't see without? Right. Yeah. So
we have an amazing ability to warp even these good gifts, right? Yeah. Like when I was listening to the sermon, I was sitting there realizing that so much of my life, instead of enjoying the gifts of memory and hope, right? So good things in the past, good things in the future, I can turn into like melancholy from nostalgia, right? Because you lie about the past, you glamorize it, right?
For sure.
There's a U2 line that says you glorify the past when the future dries up, right? And so you kind of you overhype that stage, long for it again, and then you live the rest of your life kind of fantasizing about a future reality, and you miss out on so much of the present. Yeah. And this text was so helpful for me of just being like, just be honest about the season that you're in, about the seasons that have been, whether they be good or bad, because they've all come from the Lord. Yeah. And the seasons of your future, whether they be good or bad, will all come from the Lord. And it's okay. You can just be where you are. Yeah. You know? And that's so good. Limitation is so humbling, but so helpful.
Yeah. Well, and the changing seasons really does highlight the fact that God doesn't change. I think that's even some of the comfort too, is that there's so much that's different. There's so much that changes about yourself when you look in the mirror, about your kids, the stage of life,
this guy.
Your employment. You still look as good as 20, right? You still got it. That's what Sue says. She said you still got it. But there is something so comforting that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, that he is not changing, and there's a constancy that we can have in him.
Yeah. Harlan, one of my fears in preaching something as beautiful but potentially abstract as Ecclesiastes, is that we sound real smart and then we don't give our people anything to do. And so I love the structure of your sermon, which really brought it down. It said that we can enjoy the joys that God gives to us, right? And we can endure the tears that God entrusts to us. And so Ecclesiastes reminds us that we can do both of those things. Would the two of you have any practical insights on how we can do those two things? Just how do we enjoy the joys without turning them into idols? So let's start with that one first. Let's take some good things, right? So family, good food, art, enjoyment, college football, whatever it is that we want to in the context say, hey, these are good, enjoyable things. How do we make those gifts and not gain, as you delineated in the sermon?
The author, David Gibson, he wrote the book on a commentary on Ecclesiastes called Living Life Backwards. And one of the things he was talking about was just kind of the concept of living life backwards, in the fact that there's a certain date that's coming. There's the date of our death that we're going to have to all face. And so most of us are living life forwards and, to the next thing. But if we know that there's a certainty of a death date coming, on that day, how will we have wished that we would have lived? And so I think, like, part of enjoying the moment and living in the moment of having the gift and experiencing the gift is regularly asking ourselves on that day, how will I have wanted to live this day? How will I have wanted to enjoy this time? How will I have wanted to respond to my kids? Whatever it is, how will I have wanted to work on this today? And just snapping out of the progression and the normal way that we tend to live our lives, but I don't know, who is it that said, live this day in light of that day? We got 2 days.
Yeah.
There's the spoke of that quite a lot. You know, it reminds me of the psalm as well, like teach me to number my days aright, so that I might gain a heart of understanding and wisdom, right? That there is a wisdom that comes from knowing there will be that day, and therefore I need to make the most of the gifts in this day. That's good. Yeah,
I think something that came to mind when you were talking, Halim, is also just appreciating the gift for what it is in its current state. Because I think sometimes you can be like, oh, if I just got this thing, and then you get it. And then the second you get it, you're like, oh, but I want it to be a little bit different. And it's really hard to appreciate and really breathe in the gift for what it is when we're constantly wishing, well, I mean, I wanted it, but I wanted it to look this way, right? I remember one time my son, he runs around the house all the time. It's just constant, like may as well have a cave. It's just a tornado constantly. And I remember this moment, I'm like, God, I just wish he would just not run around so much. It's insane all the time. And then he got this weird virus that attacked his legs, and he couldn't, like he could not walk, and it was temporary. But I remember praying to Jesus, like, please let him run again. Let him tear through this house and knock it down. I don't even care. Like, it just gave me such a different perspective on what a gift it was for a son who can run around and just make a mess in my house. And so I think so often as a mom and just as a human, I just can sometimes see all the problems with my gifts and want to wish them away instead of really appreciating them for what they are.
When we overestimate what something can give us, we place a burden on it that it can never hold, right? And so then it ends up destroying that thing. And painfully, I've realized I do that in personal relationships as well. We can do this with people. We place a burden on them to meet a need in us they are not created to meet. And then, you know, they disappoint us, but they were never supposed to fulfill us. Yeah. And that's just so toxic, right? And it can destroy friendships and all these good gifts.
That's right.
Okay, as we close, Halim, what would you say? I mean, as I was sitting in the sermon, just listening to tears behind me as we spoke about enduring the tears that God entrusts to us, and just knowing some of the real struggles and pains of some of our people, what would be your pastoral kind of plea with them today? People who are just really in the midst of some deep suffering. From Ecclesiastes 3, you know, shaping that. What would you say to people in the midst of some tears?
It would just be, you know, some of the things that I saw in the text and was able to preach is just that God is determined that there is a time for it. You know, in this world, that there is a time of weeping and mourning and times like that we wouldn't have ever chosen, you know, if we had the opportunity to choose or not choose. And yet he's the one who's sovereignly orchestrating it all. And there are going to be times when you just can't imagine, but God, how in the world are you going to use this for my good? You know? And so I think the anchor point that he has given us is the cross, in that when Jesus is heading to the cross and he is betrayed and arrested and going to be crucified, everyone around him at that time they're reading it as disaster. They're reading it as the end of the world. Here's this person I left everything for, and we thought he would be the answer and the savior of everything, the king who would deliver us, and yet he's going to go die. You know, and so there was a moment in time where the suffering and the sorrow was such that they couldn't imagine how this would be for good. And yet we're able to step back in a sense and read the whole of the New Testament and to see that God was doing something that we could not see. Those closest to Jesus could not see. And God was saving. He was saving them. And in the moment, if Peter was in charge, any of the disciples in charge, anybody closest to Jesus was in charge to navigate the times and choose or unchoose, they would have chosen a timeline in which there would have been no salvation. And so it's a good thing we're not in charge. And there's going to be clear moments where we have no idea how this could be for something that's God's producing to be beautiful. And yet we have that anchor of the cross that we could just keep going back to and going, if God could use the greatest suffering in all the world, the greatest evil in all the world, the darkest moment in human history, and he purposed it for good and for salvation, then he has he has a purpose and a plan in this too. This little suffering, this little evil, this little hurt,
Slight and momentary affliction.
That's exactly what I was thinking. That's kind of even the look forward. If the look back is the cross, the promise of that verse is that the light momentary affliction won't be able to be compared with the weight of glory that we'll see when we're with Christ Jesus face to face. And so it's a way to look forward and backward. It's comforting.
Well, Harlem and Belle, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you guys. That's it for another episode of Chasing Shadows. We've loved receiving your feedback, hearing from you. Again, if you would like to ask some questions or send some comments, podcasts@austinstone.org. I would also say, just as a pastor in this church, if you are in a season of great tears, we want to carry the load with you and we want to walk with you. And so please reach out to your congregational leadership. Help us to help you in that season and to walk that with you so that you are not alone. The sermon this next week will be pretty much all of chapter 4, and it's going to ask some questions about why our world is as broken as it is and why so many of the systems that ought to cause us flourishing actually cause more suffering. And so if you find yourself exasperated by the brokenness of the world, then I think it will be helpful. And so we hope to see you soon at one of our Sunday services. Otherwise, we'll catch you next week on the podcast.